環境に優しい家を建てるなら三井がいいらしいよ。三井で見つけて、三井不動産グループ。
To show the whole opening in just one video, and isn't that fun? I think the Dragon is a great opening to quick start things. There still though, of course, if you want to think this start and then walk up cd4 knight d4 knight f6 knight c3, and g6, that's the move that defines dragon. And in the dragon, you have to understand a big plus we have is our pawn structure is really sound, and we don't have any pawn weaknesses. The only one you could say is a weakness is e7, but it is so deep in our own camp that white can almost never really put pressure on it. And that means, since we have a very good pawn structure, potentially pressure down the semi-open c-file, that means it happens into an endgame. We're also doing side of the dragon is that while we develop the bishop to just trade it potentially with bishop e3, queen d2, and bishop h6 idea, castle quickly to the long side and try to start attack on the king side. So we basically have to watch out for the attack.
Hi everyone, so for those of you who are looking for a relatively easy Sicilian to start out learning and you want to avoid mountains and mountains of theories that come along with it, then the Khan Sicilian could be a really good choice for you. In fact, it was the very first Sicilian which I first started out playing and I got a lot of success with it. So I'm going to share with you in this video some of the ideas, setups that come along with it, as well as the repertoire I used to reach master level. So I hope you guys enjoy this content. Enjoy the content. White captures back and black plays it. So there are lots of moves for black. You could putting your bishop on e3, and then now the reason why I love the Khan is the first thing that most people learn when they're first starting out the open Sicilian for white is the English setup, which involves putting your bishop on e3 and then bringing your queen to d2, castling, playing f3, and marching your kingside pawns. But unfortunately against the Khan it doesn't work for white. I've had a number of games against even strong opponents, 21, 2200 plus, who fell into this, you say, trap. Bishop b4 is a really good move here. After the move queen to d2, if white tries to go into it anyway. After the move knight to f6, white plays the move pawn to f3. But now black can immediately hit out in the center with the move pawn to d5. And here white gets into a whole lot of trouble. For example, one game 2 as the best option. This, unfortunately, white might be the move pawn to g3. In this scenario, we still go the move bishop to b4. This is a really good option for black, forcing white to drop his knight back to e2. And then we can continue with the move knight to f6. Let's say bishop to g later on, and then we'll start developing our knight and bishop on the queen side. This is a very common way to attacking on the king side. That is the move bishop to e2, e3, which is to develop your pieces in general, where the pawn will be on d6, bishop on. Generally, I prefer taking with the pawn.
あった。いい未来を探せるインディード。
転職活動ってどう進めればいいんだろう。自分に合うやり方を選びたいな。
So instead of those particular moves, the main move in this position is definitely bishop to d3. Now after the move bishop to d3, I'm pretty much always going to suggest bishop to c5 whenever the knight on d4 is not defended. So after the move bishop to c5, white can defend it with the move bishop to e3, I suppose. But then as black, if your bishop is not being chased, you can probably just keep it on c5, develop with knight f6, play d6, knight d7 or knight c6, and a blunder. You can, if your bishop is not being chased, you can probably just keep it on c5, develop with knight f6, play d6, knight d7 or knight c6, and continue from there. But generally white will drop the knight back to chase it away, and then you can bring it back to e7. It's very important that you don't go to a7 in this position. It is in fact a blunder. You can do it when the queen is on d8, but when the queen is not on d8, I think queen g4 is simply winning here for white, or leads to a very big advantage. So you definitely have to go to move bishop e7 here. And then let's say after the move queen to g4 here, well, black can simply play the move pawn to g6. So this is something we'll have a look at later, but it's perfectly okay for black to do so. After the move castles, pawn to d6, pawn to f4. And in this position, again, you have to be a little bit careful in this exact position because you should play the move knight to d7 first. If you go knight to f6 here, I think e5 is a very, very strong sacrifice, which not many people know about. And if black captures the pawn, white recaptures, queen takes, bishop f4 is extremely annoying here. Actually, the line goes queen h5, bishop to e2, queen to g6. Because the queen has almost no squares to go to. Like it's pretty much all controlled along the fifth rank. So we really only have a couple of squares here, f5, g6, h5. And instead of repeating moves and accepting a draw, which we would in fact be very happy with here, white can play a very strong move, pawn to h4, and I think white is actually winning here. For example, if we play the move pawn to h5 to stop at h5, then white can play the move bishop to g5, and now the threat of bishop to d3 actually trapping our queen is very, very strong and very hard to stop. So be very mindful of this, and try to play knight d7 first, so then you prevent this whole e5 pawn sacrifice. So here generally white has two main setups. They go for ones where the queen's on f3 or the queen's on e2. So let's have a look at the queen on e2 first. Knight f6, bishop to d2, let's say the move pawn to b5, which is the setup we're generally going for, rook to e1. So white is playing for a quick e5 pawn break here. Now the best plan, I would say, against this sort of idea from white is to play this move pawn to b4, which I've had in a number of games. After the move pawn to b4, one game I had went knight to d1, and then here I castled with the idea that white is unable to capture this pawn because of the move queen to b6 check, picking up the bishop on b4. And also by kicking the knight away, we answer the move pawn to e5 with a square for our knight on d5, whereas with the knight on c3 we're unable to use that d5 square because white will just capture it. Now in this position, knight f2 was played, and in the game I had, I went pawn to a5. Now generally in this setup, the idea is to trade off these light squared bishops, because that's by far the most dangerous piece white has. So if we can sort of trade off these light squared bishops, then black is relatively happy. And we're going to do this by playing queen b6 or bishop a6 at some point, maybe even a4, knight c5. So I had continued queen to f3, pawn to b6 or bishop a6 at some point, maybe even a4, knight c5. So I had one game here which continued, I think, pawn to e5, and then I played knight to d5 here with a complicated game, but black is doing okay. So another game continued, queen to f3, pawn to b5, bishop to e3, knight f6 again. Here e5 is well met by the move bishop to b7, attacking the queen. So a3, bishop to b7, let's say rook a to e1. And once you get into this type of position, generally you have two main plans. So one plan is going to involve being a little bit more aggressive and keeping the king in the center, and that's to play the move pawn to h5. So this is not for every position, by the way. Only certain positions this works quite well. Generally, whenever you have the bishop on e3, it works quite well because the knight goes to g4 and attacks the bishop, so you win a tempo there. Or generally if the king is on h1, let's say the king goes here, sometimes you can play the move pawn to h4 and try to undermine this diagonal. So for example, let's say white plays the move pawn to h3 to prevent you playing h3, otherwise black would push the pawn up the board. Then let's say you play the move knight h5, knight e2 to stop the knight jumping into the g3 square, and black would play a move such as f5 here to try and undermine this diagonal, and things get very, very complicated, very, very messy. But if this is the type of position you're looking for, then h5 is the way to go. Sometimes you can also just put your knight on g4, and then you can even sometimes challenge white's pawn on f4 with the move pawn to g5 and try to put a knight onto this e5 square. So this g5 move, type of pawn break, the bishop can still maneuver back as well. And sometimes by so now we get into the mainline option by far, and that is the move bishop to d3 here on move 5, without knight c3 included. So in this position, black plays a move bishop to c5, again attacking the knight drops back. Now you do actually have two options in this position. I think bishop a7 is actually probably the more solid option, and objectively it's probably better than bishop to e7, but even still, I quite like the move bishop to e7, but definitely you should have bishop a7 in your repertoire. The main difference compared to the previous line I showed you is that since the queen is not on c7, queen g4 is met by queen f6. But we're going to look at the move bishop to e7 mainly for this repertoire. And here, for example, if white castles, we can play the move pawn to d6. Again, we're going for the same setup. So for example, if white goes for something like c4, or doesn't go for c4, it doesn't make a huge difference. We'll still play in the same manner. And here we're going for the move pawn to b6. Again, with the same sort of plans, this hedgehog formation as black, and after move king 4. And actually my opponent blundered in this position. Of course he's unable to capture here on f6 because pawn takes g2, instead just in a lost position after castles. This is fine. This is totally fine for black. Sometimes you can defend against e5 indirectly as well. You can sort of move your rook, let's say rook to d8. This is another way to defend against e5, because let's say if e5 comes, you can take, and then take like this, and let's say if white trades everything off, then the bishop on d3 is hanging 6, queen to e2, pawn to d6, castles, knight to d7. The whole point of queen to g4 is that white's going to get into the same position, but say that, you know, this g6 pawn move weakens our position quite considerably. e5. If knight to f6, then the idea from white is to go bishop h6. You can play this position, but it's not particularly pleasant, I would say. So here, I think white should play the move knight to e5. And in this position, white has a couple of ideas. If he goes f4, which is, and then queen c7. And here, for example, let's say white plays the move pawn to a4. We continue with knight to f6. And if bishop h6 here, our idea as black is to play the move pawn to d5, which in this exact position seems to work quite well and it equalizes for black. The idea is that we have all these tactics involving knight g4 and this bishop on h6 is hanging. So for example, let's say pawn takes, we can capture back. Now if bishop to d3, already black is completely winning after the move knight to g4. Say bishop to g7 is one move, knight to g4 is a good reply to that. Because actually you can't take the rook in this position because unfortunately there's a checkmating threat here on h1. And rook to f7, and it looks bad at first, but black is a piece up, and most likely white will have to capture and go into this position where I think black is totally fine. So that is the move 10 knight to a3. So if instead of knight a3, white goes the move knight to c3. We can also, but in this position, I'm going to recommend something very similar to capture the pawn, and black.
Sicilian timer propagation.
Hey guys, welcome back. So a question I often get asked is which Sicilian defense should I be playing? So I've put together this video with the pros and cons of each one so you get a rough idea of what to expect. Also stay until the very end and I'll give you my top 3 picks for Sicilian defense repertoires. So let's jump right into the list. Off with the first one, the Taimanov, happens after e6, d4 captures, and black will play the move knight to c6. This is one of my personal favorite Sicilians, and it's sort of a more solid version of the Khan. However, white has a few very dangerous lines against it, and there's many options for white here, but it definitely deserves to go near the top. The next one is the O'Kelly. This one is one of the options for black where it's not good for white to go into an open Sicilian with d4. Because if white plays d4 here, black will capture, play e5, after knight b3, black has the move knight to f6, and if white goes knight to c3, then black will play the move bishop to b4, and already black has a really nice Sicilian. However, if white knows what he's doing, he won't go into an open Sicilian and just opt for pawn to c3 or pawn to c4 earlier on instead. Therefore, I would put the O'Kelly in the just tricks pile. Next one is the Classical. Classical is very flexible opening, and it can be played at all levels. There's a few different move orders you can get to, but this is one of the most popular ones. Happens after knight to c6. We can transpose into similar structures as a knight off, even a dragon or Scheveningen, and overall it's just a very good quality opening. So I would put it at the very top. Next we have the Nimzovich. This is not as popular as the other ones. It happens after knight to f6. The idea is that black will follow up with the move pawn to d5, depending on what white plays. If white plays e5, then the knight will obviously go to d5. And this one I would say is more of a tricky opening. It works well in faster time controls. Next one we have the Scheveningen. This I would consider more of the structure because you can get it from many different move orders. The only thing with the Scheveningen is I wouldn't go into it from the main move order, or I don't like to go into it from the main move order, since after the move pawn to d6 here, white can play the very dangerous pawn move, pawn to g4. And now we get into a Kira's attack, which is extremely dangerous for black. But if you play into a Scheveningen from a different move order, then I would say it's perfectly okay. And I would definitely put it at the very top.
Actually, I don't.
So next we have the Sicilian, one of my personal favorites, which is the Khan. Happens after knight f3, e6, d4 takes, and then pawn goes to a6, and I often put the queen on c7, followed by either pawn to b5, bishop b7, and it's just a very flexible opening. But I would say there are times when it can get extremely sharp and uncomfortable when white is pushing a lot of pawns on your king side. It's definitely a little bit less sound than the Taimanov, but it can be played at a high level. So next opening we have on the list is the Kaprejcik. Happens after d6, captures, knight c3, bishop to d7. This is sort of a very sophisticated waiting move for black, where he's looking to see what setup white chooses and then change his accordingly. It does require you to know a lot more setups as black here and be flexible, but overall it's definitely a playable option. The next one we have is the pin variation. Takes place after e6. Knight goes to f6, knight c3, black will play the move bishop to b4. Here white can gain advantage if he doesn't know what he's doing, but it's definitely a good surprise weapon and it can catch some opponents off guard. So I put it at the bottom here. The next one we have is the 4 knights. The 4 knights takes place after. Usually black will play the move knight to c6 instead, and we'll get from this move order. After knight c3, black will play the move pawn to e6. And here white can play any number of moves, including knight to b5 and knight takes c6. I don't think it's that good as a main weapon. Next one we have is the Paulson Basman. I believe this one is after d4, knight takes, and bishop to c5. So I don't think there's anything special with this particular opening, and I think white can get a very comfortable advantage. I put it a bit lower here on the list. And now we get into one of the main openings, which is the knight off. Captures, and black will play a6. Of course, this is one of the best openings in chess, but it's also one of the most difficult openings in chess to learn. And it deserves to be at the very top, of course. The next one is the b6 variation. So after knight f3, black will play move b6 here. So there's some flexibility to this move, but I think there's just a lot of better options on this list, and that high. So next one on the list is the hedgehog, trying to constrict black. But this one is the hyper accelerated dragon. Black will play the move pawn to g6 immediately here. One of the downsides is that white doesn't have to go into the d4 pawn structures. He can opt for the move pawn to c3 as well as pawn to c4. So because of this, I put it a little bit lower than the other ones, but it's definitely a respectable opening. And the next one is the accelerated dragon. Black will play knight to c6, d4 captures, and then pawn to g6. Again, a very solid and good opening, except that the only downside is it allows the Maroczy bind. So if you don't like playing against the Maroczy, then you shouldn't go for this opening. Next we have the mainline dragon, which takes place after d6 move order, captures, pawn to g6. This is a very aggressive option, and it's a very good option if you like counterattacking, but because of the Yugoslav attack, you will have to know a lot of theory here to navigate your way safely through. It is definitely a high tier opening. So next one we have is the Kevnes. So there's a lot of different tricky move orders in Sicilian. This one happens after d4 takes, and black will play the move queen to b6. But I'm not a particular fan of this particular move order here, queen to b6, because white has a very strong response. I believe it's bishop to e3 is one of them among many. And if we capture the pawn on b2, white can just sacrifice it and play the move knight to d2. And I believe this is extremely dangerous for black. So I'm not a big fan of this opening at all. I put it probably close to the bottom. So the next one is the Gordiva. I like this move order a lot more. So after knight to c6, captures, the queen goes to b6. We're actually hitting the knight here on d4, so we're forcing the knight to move to maybe a less optimal square on b3. And definitely this is a lot more playable. Next we have is the Dragendorf. So Dragendorf is sort of like a mixture between the dragon and Najdorf. There's really nothing wrong with this opening, and it's just perfectly playable. Next we have is the Kalashnikov. Happens after knight c3, captures, and black will play the move pawn to e5. So this is a very good option as well for players who like similar structures to the Shevchnikov. Often black will delay developing his kingside knight though and put it to either e7, sometimes even push a pawn to f5. It's definitely a good opening we can consider playing. It's not very common. So I would put it maybe at the back of the respectable pile. And lastly we get the Shevchnikov, which happens after knight f3, knight c6, d4 captures, the black knight goes to f6, knight c3, and black will play the move pawn to e5 here. The game will often continue knight to b5, d6, and then black gets his weaknesses on the light squares, but in return we get a lot of dynamic compensation and attacking opportunity. So this is a very good opening, just in general for players who like more aggressive style of play and are willing to play around the weaknesses. So that concludes my picks for my favorite Sicilians on this tier list. Of course, everything in the champion and god tier would be perfectly playable as a standalone Sicilian on its own, but it's also fun to mix and match and try different ones together. And I've suggested.
So today I want to know about Sicilian Taimanov. Should grasp the main idea of the opening. あれよりもね、あれをつかむ、なんか手順を覚えるよりもね、はい、もっと割と長めの動画でセオリーについて解説してくれてる暇人はいないかな。まあいいか。ちょっとまずはちょっと AI でぶっちゃけ自分のパソコンのスペックが低すぎてこの間っていうか2018、19ぐらいに死んじゃったけど、ソ連の マーク・タイマノフっていうおっさんが作ったらしいけど、まあいろんなの見ていくか。ワインド作るとナイト行ったりするとビショップなんかちょっとややこしいことになるのか、引かされてなんか若干ややこしいことになるのか。ちなみにここ以外に引くと多分形勢一気に損ねるよね。あんまり C4 はいいアイディアじゃないと。ちなみにこういうのはあんまこれもあんまいいアイディアじゃないと。これなんかと合流するんじゃない？そんなことない？イングリッシュアタックと合流するんじゃない？気のせいか。なんか
グリーンだからは7つの素材で体に嬉しいスポドリなんです。
これ解除したいんだけどすべてが間違ってるんだ。多分な、長期決算に最高は重要。和訳したのがこうなってるんだろうけど、多分。
I think it's possible to see me play non-weirdly, but openings, specifically in Sicilian, because that's the video series we're doing. Now that I said that, as soon as I said that, I pictured myself holding like a bow on top of a castle, you know, like in Game of Thrones or something. That's a cool thumbnail. I wanna talk to someone about that. With Pichu like a mini dragon. About everything that's there, because I don't really play everything that's there. I'm gonna talk a lot. I have to think of just a6 or just knight f6 or whatnot. We are not going to be covering d6 to anything with like d6, e6 to knight. That's for next week, because that's Scheveningen. Besides that, I do want to briefly mention a6 more towards the end of the class, because that gets weird, and I like to end the Sicilian 4 knight. We're going to talk about queen c7 mostly now. To be fair, there are knight f6, but then you might get e5s at some point. Not right now, because there's a unfortunate check. But you know, there are, like, if black plays it weird, there are stuff like this, so just be mindful of if you get the chance to play e5 as white. Alright, so knight c6, knight out, queen out, bishop moves. I've missed this mouse. It's very smooth. It's gonna make me give out some moves. There's a question, why do I prefer e4 over d4? I gave d4 line the try, but I just felt more comfortable with d4. I really liked the middle games of it. I really liked the openness of the position, or even if it was in a closed opening such as French, I still felt relatively comfortable, so don't let me stop you. But for right now, I'm going to talk about bishop e2. So bishop e2, pawn moves, we get the beautiful castle. Well, I get my beautiful castle. Knight f6, and I play this bishop e3. It took me such a long time to get comfortable in this middle games and in this specific structure, so this is more of an introduction for you. You will still have a lot to work on your own, because this is a very classical line, and there are lots of classical games. I'm thinking of a specific game of Karpov, specific game of Kasparov. There's like this, the line that we're going to look at, it's very, very well played and well known, so please do not just take this video and go play it. You have to do more analysis and research on it. However, for the time being, first things first, if opponent plays bishop e7, this kind of turns into Scheveningen, because d6 will follow, so we're not going to talk about it right now. Well, there's a weird b5. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think take is alright, and then you can, like f4 sounds reasonable to me, because you want to start going at e5, right? And then if b4, then you can go for e5. I think that's a very reasonable response. You can also just go for knight a4, and then try to play like c3, and try to include your knight back in the game that way. Bishop d1, you could know it. Alright, just know that that possibility exists. Also, I think it can be with a different move order, so it can be with like a6 first, knight out, then queen out, bishop out. And if you go bishop e3 now, they'll have bishop e4. So this is a possibility. There's so many different transpositions that can get a little headachy. Right now, yeah, like there's a bishop g5. You can also do like a cube like bishop d2. So just be aware of this existence of bishop before when there's no knight on c6. Okay. Now that give my fair warning, let's go back to the main line with bishop b4 now. So if bishop b4 now, you kind of gotta go for this knight a4, and now the opponent has few options. There is this bishop e7. There is one castle. Those two are the big ones. There are a bunch of other tiny bad moves. Because if it was similar concepts, we can
普段見る監視やんと
D6 is also
メイン
this database,
ム
but
ー
I
ブオーダー
have
が違うから
does not right now. It doesn't make much sense. C4 is very interesting. C4 is very doable as well. Now, if
わからないな
I'm getting a knight to b6 option suggested. Now, if I rook f7, we can bring this. So, what if they go like bishop f4 now? What if they just eat your pawn? So, they got discontinued.
動かす順番が違うから
Nice one. When dorso sex, pawn. いろんなオープニング見てみ
All right, welcome everyone. So this is Grandmaster Sam Shankland, and this will be the introductory video to explain what you're going to get in this course, what you can expect, and all that. So this is a course on tactics in the Grunfeld and on the sort of Grunfeld themes. Now, I have to be very clear right from the start, this is not an openings course. I talk a little bit about opening theory and a couple of various spots, and there's no doubt that to try to solve. Now, my hope is that you will try to solve all the tactics first, then go over the complete game section, and then try to solve the tactics again. Maybe write them down on a separate piece of paper or something, and see if you've seen any other middle H3 or A3 at some. I've seen an introductory video, so we're going to do proper exchanges, things like that. Find yourself in an unpleasant position if you don't use energetic means to punish your opponent when they do too ambitious things or when they lag behind in development. We saw a whole section on that, and the Grunfeld is certainly not an opening to play if you don't feel comfortable in giving a somewhat suspect position that you have to justify with concrete play, stuff like that. In any case, what we're going to look at now is a section more on complete games and on actual pawn structures that you'll see in the Grunfeld, and sort of what happens if you... So here's put together the strongest possible, but there are definitely cases where it's correct. So we're going to go over a very nice gameplay by Gadakomsky, who's in his nature more of a technical player, but is also very good at the Grunfelds, both in the tactical and in the technical sort of phases. So in this game, he's playing black against Luke von Whaley. It starts off, obviously, as a Grunfeld. And white chooses the bishop c4 variation. And his point of developing his pieces this way is that after the inevitable c5, knight e2, and knight c6, bishop e3, white has put together the strongest possible defense against the against the attack on the d4 pawn. There's the knight would undoubtedly be more actively placed on f3, but the problem is if this knight were dragged to f3, that black would have a resource like bishop g4 available to remove the defender and as such put more pressure. In addition, there's always moves like queen a5 hanging over white's head, pinning the c3 pawn and threatening it. Well, here neither of these moves are an issue. If black were to play bishop g4, white always has f3 available. That's sort of the reason the knight went to e2 in the first place. Similarly, queen a5, white can just castle out of it. He totally doesn't care. Because the c3 pawn is not hanging, so he doesn't have to burn a tempo on a move like queen d2, which could even allow a queen trade. So the point of white's setup is that it's very, very compact, and it does a very good job of defending his center. And frankly, there's no real way for black to attack it that effectively. But what black can do is point out that white's pieces are a little bit poorly placed. So, for example, after a castle, black has a whole host of moves here. I've always been impartial to queen c7 myself. This is my favorite move in the position. In some cases, black would like to increase the pressure on the d4 pawn by means of rook d8. He can also simply continue his development with a move like d6. And I've actually played this move, I think, not quite every game I've played in this position, but quite a few. Definitely my last two in the Grunfeld I played queen c7. In addition, white has to look out for tactics with cd4 and knight takes d4, so if he were to just go about his merry way with, I don't know, h3 or something, you can take and knight takes d4 with the point that this bishop on c4 is hanging. In any case, since I'm not really trying to discuss the opening, Kamsky chose a very different approach for this game, which is he chased the bishop away. This move knight a5 is quite good because the bishop on c4, it's an active piece pointing at the king side and everything, but it's not a stable piece, and by playing knight a5, black forces it backwards. And then black played b6. At basically any moment, he's totally happy to just give a pawn with dc5 because after something like dc5, for instance, queen c7, takes, white's proud center is long since gone and black's pieces are more active. The rook on a8 has already been developed and black can continue with bishop e6 or bishop a6 and plant the knight on c4. And black's going to be fine. And after queen d2, black even encouraged white to go ahead and do that by playing the move e5. Now, if white were to take on c5 here, and black plays something like bishop e6, I believe black has full compensation for his missing pawn because white's pieces really don't coordinate well. A move like knight c4 could be hanging over white's head. And the problem is this extra pawn is these double pawns on c3 and c5, and if white ever tries to exchange one off, something like cb6, black develops his rook too. So, in any case, these are sort of the kind of sacrifices you'll see. In addition, you'll note that this knight on e2 is really awful. I mean, that knight really wants to be on f3, and the pawn on e5 thoroughly dominates it. It's very hard for white to even find a constructive move here. And black can play queen c7, rook fd8, knight c4 could be coming pretty soon. I think black is fine, assuming, presumably Kamsky did too. But what e5 really does is provoke white into advancing d5. And this leads to the sort of locked center pawn structure that you see where black has played e5, compelling white to play d5. So at this point, there's really not that much action going on in the center, and all has been locked. And it seems like it should just be good for white, because white has extra space, and because white has more pawns in the center. But in reality, there's a lot more to it than that. These positions have to be assessed very carefully. And I believe these structures are basically a disaster for black if, and only if, this c3 pawn is back on b2, which is a completely different opening, essentially, because in order for that to happen, white cannot be playing c takes d5 and e4, where he gets the big center in the first place. So those kinds of structures should be avoided. Because if you can imagine that pawn going back there, white would have a very easy way to open the queenside with b2 to b4. That opens the c-file, where the protected pass pawn on d5 can really become useful in controlling key squares. And in general, I think that black would just be worse if white could pull this off. Maybe much worse. But as is, the queenside is completely locked, and it's very hard to see how white can even try to open. The knight on a5 is a little bit weirdly placed. Ideally, the knight belongs on d6, because knights belong in front of pass pawns. One nice point about the knight on a5 is it really precludes white from making the advance a4 and a5 himself. So it's very hard for white to do very much. And then if white tries to open the position on the king side with a move like f4, he's always going to be running into moves like e takes f4, and then the black bishop on g7 is opened up. So I actually think black is doing pretty well here. But it's all because of a few things. First, that white's pawn is on c3, meaning the queen side can't be opened. And second, because he can't get a4, a5 in. So black plays a very typical Grunfeld move. And this is almost like a King's Indian inside of Grunfeld. He would just start throwing pawns with f5. So white could play f3 to try to solidify his center, but I presume Kamsky would have played f4, which will lead to a pretty similar position to the game. And after bishop f2, black should play c4. This is very important. We'll get to why in a bit. And after something like bishop c2, g5, I don't think there's too much need to discuss this position because it's very, very similar to what we got in the game. So we'll just skip over that. In any case, in the game, white included the moves bishop g5, in this position. He played bishop g5 first, queen e8, and then he played f3. It's important to note that white can never really get away with f4. He'd like to, but to try to open the position and make use of his passed pawn, but this move always runs into some kind of trouble. For instance, black can try something like h6, pointing out that after bishop to h4, e takes f4, white cannot comfortably take this pawn back because there's going to be a fork with g5. In addition, black can consider something like f takes e4. Probably if he's going to do fe4, it makes more sense to do it directly, because after takes, he the move c4, has to play bishop g5, e2 has been different, and black wants to get 3. I don't think he ever wants to take on f4, proved all of his been able to drum up absolutely nothing of playing slowly. And it's important to note that while the pawn at f6 played c4, first of all, by playing I have to do, pawn is the big one. No doubt that this is strategic.
ニノシーなら角度の高い不動産投資できますよ。独自 AI の活用で入居率 99%。価値が下がりづらいんだ。そう。
e4 周辺見ていくか。ボゴインディアン祭り。ちなみにこういうことをするとなんかちなみと 仮にこれでこれなら2メゾやればいいか。この周辺のセオリーもないまいち把握できてないんだよな。一応メインラインがクイーン C2 のはずだけど、その理由が未だつかめてない。一応これも存在するよね。いや、なんかを見つけに行くんだよ。何かね、どういうんだろう、その局面の性質の心をつかみに行くんだよ。あるじゃん、そのいろんな局面がさ、要はそのアイアナグマだったら駒切り飛ばしてでも相手を殺しに行くのがメインのスタンスみたいな、そういう局面の性質もあればさ、その対抗系だったらさ、こうするとか、アイアグラだったらなんか角とか切ってでも敵陣に成り駒を作って確実にクロック入れに行くのが正義みたいな、そういうスタンスがあるじゃん。いっぱいブリッツでレニングラードバリエーション見るけど、I decide to match back pin for pin and the なんか自分がピンするから相手もピンするよみたいな。そういう The e4 square is once more in no man's land and e4 が誰のものでもなくなるとまたmore subtle is the fact that Black's knight no longer controls d5 either. So for that reason, なんちゃらcalls the d5 and the point, but also the necessary consequence of bishop to g5. だけど h6 or c5 is almostちなみにこういうことするとダメなの？よくさ、ママで試合やるとこれ見るんだよね。これ1000回ぐらい見てる記憶ある。100万回ぐらい見るよこれ。シナムとこれも普通に黒良さそうだよね。こういうとこ引くとなんかやばいこと起きんの？相手どっかどかして入るとなんかゲームセット感が半端ないな。それ以外の手を指すとこういう普通に軽タラで終わりか。C2 the white queen protects the knight and C3 meaning the black will no longer be able to double white pawns by exchanging bishops or not. Before a note on strategy and rules also. Beginning chess players are often told not to move the queen too early in zone. なるほど。いろいろセオリーが語られてると。ちなみにこういうことするとどこがダメなんだ。いや別に全然ダメじゃないか。こういうの良くないのかな。いや別に全然させるよねこれ。別に全然させる気がするけど、なんかよろしくないことが起きるのかな。いや別に全然黒持ってさせると思うけど、一旦キャストとか。けど若干嫌かこれ。うざいかこれ。このゲームの原則、敵にうざいものができたらすぐ崩しに行くっていうのが、いやうざいものを固定される前に崩しに行くっていうのがセオリーのなんとなく分かった。敵だけいいものを作り出すことは基本許されないのがこのゲームだから。将棋だとそういう運ゲーだから適当に駒を交換してればごまかせちゃうけど、これどうしようもないからな。一旦失敗になるともう失敗だからな。Ace 3 is the main move played more than 1 million times. Knight S3 is the less popular move played now 2000. だからレアな方から見ていくか。CD3 takes on D5 Bishop to G5 これの対処わかんないんだよな。いや一旦ニムズを若干見たとして、どういう心があるのこれには。ちなみとこの順序だとこれやるとなんかこれつくのが若干なんかうざい感じになってるから成立するのか。こういう守り方するとこれどういう意味だろうな。邪魔な位置に置かせて帰りますよと。実際あなた何もしてないですよねっていうようなそういう主張か。 れ周辺の話も難しいな。あなた遮りましたね、じゃあ私帰ってきますよっていう。だからこうならないようにこうなのか。するとしたら私行って早いですよっていうことか。ちなみにとこういうことするとどういうことが起きるの？めちゃめちゃうざいかこれ。取り単に取るとゲームが終わるのか。こういうことするとこれでもまだいい勝負っちゃいい勝負なんだね。だから先にこれつくとうざがる人がこれやってこれやるとこれがめちゃめちゃ構造上不愉快なのか。だからこれ取れるようにするわけね。ちなみにこうつかないね。その心はこうじゃなくてこれな。その心はビショップを通しておきたいからだ。つくと簡単に取ると白だけが持ってて黒が阻まれててめちゃめちゃうざいのかこれ。そのうちつくよなこれ。させないことはないよなこれ。してみるか、のんびり。さっき教わったことをおっとそれなんかやばいこと起きないの？ 7糸が、あ、てかあれか。これつくべきだったか、ついて取っとくべきだったか。普通に考えて。鳥は先に入ってやばいか。鳥つきは引いてついておくと、これが若干うざいのか。そしたら相手入ればいいから。こうしてこっちで取ってくるのか。だったらさっきこれだな。これ耐えてるかわかんない。なんか死んでそうだな。が、しかしつくと取るけど、なんか先に F6 入るのがめちゃめちゃ痛そうだな。次はもう相手つく権利を失ったから。あ、危ね。ゆっくりすぎて時間がなくなっちゃう。このコマよりこっちの方がちょっと価値があると判断した。このオープンファイル狙いながら相手跳ねたり。つこうとしてるのかな。もらえるものはもらって帰る。実は結構やばいかこれ。そんなこともない。死んだ。やば。やっぱ時間がなくなるな。ちなみにこういうことすると、一旦跳ねるべきだったな。あんまりいいあれじゃなかったかな。 ちなみにこれがいい理由はこういうことすると普通にビショップが死ぬからか。あんまりなんかな、メインのコンセプトがつかめないとな。どこまでの許容範囲内で どの手が悪いのかっていうのが理解できないから。これとかどういう意味があんのかっていう、このラインに置いておきたいみたいな心があんのかな。眠い。明日もまたなんか実験とかやることになるの？うざ。マジでそれはね、チーズ牛丼食ってそう。3食チーズ牛丼食ってそう。それこれの対策も個別に学ばなきゃな。先にビショップ外出しときたいよな。これわかんないんだけど、疲れたりしたらどういう対応すればいいの？我々疲れてこういうのとか本当に大丈夫なのこれ？疲れたら取ってつくと、こうついた時になんか自らピンにするのがキモいの。これまだ理解できてないんだけど、なんか名前ついてたよね、ビショップ G5 の。なんかシリアンのモスクワバリエーションとなんちゃらアタックと、このビショップで出てくる界隈マジで滅べばいいと思ってんだけど、超つまんなくしない？物事を。相手が退席したようです。投了させるをしても意味ないし。今度は取られてもナイトで取り返せるしみたいな。うぜえな。一挙手一投足すべてがうぜえなこれ。取られたら取って開けながら、取られたら取って上げてついていくみたいな。でもしかしたらキャッスルかもしれないし、クイーン出てロンキャスするかもしれないし。そっか。跳ねてきたら一応ブロックしとけばいいか。 うぜえなそれ。今交換してつけなくすればいいの。これがだいぶうざいな。ついてきたら一旦出てあそこから追い出せばいいのかな。ついてきたら一旦出て。仮に取ったら僕オープンファイルができるし、じわじわスペース広げていけばいいか。また毎回恒例のゆっくりしすぎて時間なくなる感じなんだけど。一旦帰ってもらおうか。クイーンをいい位置に持ってきて、ちょっと入っとく。よいしょ。すべてを回収していくか。若干変だなこれ。おかしくしてる。こう交換しに行こう。あれちょっとうざいから。クイーンもちょっと交換しよう。ほんとごめん、ちょっとせこいことしかできなくてごめん。ごめん、君のマットはちょっと受け付けられない。普通に試合でも勝ったが、ほんとごめん。これ引くのどうして悪いの？なんか 本譜の展開見てみよう。これ取られて取っても別に戦えると思ってたんだけど、これいけないのこれ。ついてさ、そうついて、あ、やっぱそうよね。クイーンサイドキャスリング消されるのがうざいのこれ。ついてなんかこの辺に置いて、だけどこのナイトがクソ硬いからな。ここのクイーン交換を巡る攻防とか、どこを視点にいい良し悪しを判断すればいいのか分かんないんだよ。なんかセオリー上はダブルポン2つあるけど、オープンファイル2つあるし、このビショップが何もできないから将来的になんか全部肩透かしされたら死んでいくだけってこと？ちなみにこれで作る気だったっていうのはどういう理屈なの？これがマジで嫌だったんだけど、いやまあなんかこの辺防いでからでもいいけど、こういうのがほんと嫌だったんだけど、これやばくないの？これで死なないのこれ我々。なんかこれが超嫌でさ、局面評価がなんかミスってるのかな。局面評価の羅針盤が狂ってんのかな。これを嫌だと思ってるうちはまだまだなのかな。別に全然黒にとってやばくないのかな。だって仮にオープンファイル作ってもなんか支えてて不愉快だよこれ。けどその反面なんか割と硬いポーンストラクチャーだし、特にカロカンスラブストラクチャーみたいな超やりたくなかったんだけどこれ。まあこうなるわなって感じだけど、まあ別に嫌じゃないのかなこれ。この一句が若干窮屈だからってことかな。つくと逆転できてこういうことわからんと解決してくれる人を探してる。こうか。我々の日常を披露するこれ。それなんか欠陥ない？そんなことないか。わからん。なんか疲れた時に取り返せるようにしてるはずだから。で仮にこれにはクリーン上がって って寄って引いた時になんか刺す手あるかな。そしたら取って次序盤適当に刺していつも皆さんそうじゃん。ほとんどオートパイロットに刺して序盤やることなくなって小回り同じなのにマイナス1000とかなってんじゃん。いつも日常じゃんそれ。もう皆さんの自分なんかにマイナス1000とか食らわないでくれませんかって感じだったわ、マジで。で若干ここに弱点作るのもありかな。つくか。一旦引いとく。こっち引く。こっち引く。それとも入るはないか。めちゃめちゃ でかい穴ここにできたけど生きてんのそれも。ワンチャンここに置いとく。するんだろうけど。あ、また時間がなくなったな。ついてくんのか。うざいなそれ。こう疲れるんだけ防いでもう特攻したいんだけど。ちょっと神風アタックさせてくれませんか。マジで神風アタック始まってんの。引かれてめんどくさいかこれ。引かれて疲れて。だけどそしたらクイーンどっか逃げといて。次つけば撃通過。これについたらこれもう浮かんだけでついたらナイト持ってきて。でつけばに寄ったらこれ回収すれば。 仮に取ったら、国によって取ると取ったら向こう取ればいい。置いといて取ればいいか。寄ったら取っといて、取ったら取ればメイトだから。メイトなんだ。うん。これめっちゃやばいの？これ動画 3.0 もあんの？エンジンバグってんじゃね？ほんとソフト嫌いなんだけど。これでいきなり 2.1 とかもうふざけてますやん。ほんとソフト嫌いもん。なんなのこのなんかマイナス 1.3 とかふざけてますやん。そんな悪くないでしょ別に。これ確かにおかしいけど。こっからはもう将棋になってないか。普通に駒正してたよね。またお前か。わかんない。クラシカルかもしれない。価値観全否定するこれで。 人の価値観全否定する楽しみを。これやる人本当人間性どうかしてると思う、我ながら。なんかシリアンのコンセプトを全て破壊するよね、これとか。お互いやってて楽しくないことは嬉野流みたいな感じで慎んだ方がいいと思ってる。いいから別に変なおっさんにマスター構造賞とかやんなくて。ここに穴があるから、あれを取りに行くか。もしかしてこれはもうもらったんじゃないこれ。かなりもらってるでしょこれ。構造上これがクソ弱くね。だしこれさえつかせなきゃいいから。仮にナイト跳ねたら取ってクイーンに行けばいいか。クイーンに行って跳ねてこれをついてこれだけ防げばいいか。ここに穴ぼこがあるから跳ねて、けど跳ねると入って取って若干うざいこれ。跳ねたらポンつくとナイトの行き場所はどっか行ったらナイト入ればいいのか。取る？こういうのはどっち取る方がいいんだろうな。クイーン標的にするか。クイーン標的にするか。回ってポンつくのもありそうだけど。まあいいや。ナイト跳ねるとか。ルック回ったらビショップで一旦引いてアンチに行く。若干やばいやってること。ひょっとしてポン疲れてやかこれ。クイーン交換しちまえばナイト入られてめんどいこれ。 間がなくなったまだ。また時間なくしてややこしくしたな。局面自体必勝だったのにな。ああ、もうめんどくさくしたわ。最悪。なえ。これでいいのか。ああ、もうめんどくさくしたな。もう最悪。なんでなんか、ね、粘る余地を与えてしまったんだろう。ビショップ置いて入るの皆さん。ああ、もう最悪やんこれ。負けまであるでしょこれ。もうめんどくさくしたな。ああ、もう最悪。あ、駒ただやんこれ。イライラしてくるとろくなことないよな。あ、それもまた駒ただだ。しょうもな。しょうもないな今の。マジで全否定するけど、これもなくもないんだよね全然。こういう場面さ、どうしてなんか引くんじゃなくて取るのが正解なの？このフォームが弱くなるからってことか。なんかもうちょっと孤立ポーンの補正を自分の頭の中で弱くした方がいいな。孤立ポーン関数みたいなものを。孤立ポーンが評価が自分の中でまだちょっと若干ね、評価値 5.0 とかついてる。だからもうめんどくさ さいことねするんだけど。もう1000回ぐらい必勝だったのに。しかもこれで終わりだったしね。一瞬だけ引っ張りにするけど、これをまたこの辺ボロボロ取って、なんかこの辺の駒全部取ってキングとポーンだけにしてついていってる間にキングが向かっていって、でその間にこの辺のポーン全部回収すれば勝ちだから、セオリー上勝ちなんだよ。それが自分がなんか実験とかよりもセオリーの方を重視する理由なんだよ。農学部はアホみたいに実験って言いたがるけど違うから、まだ東大の教授も分かってないセオリーの重要さ。農学部は頭悪いから。農学部は頭悪いから理解してない。それ見たことない。見たことあるけどない。これなんかポンついて別に悪くないんじゃなかったっけ。あ、また同じミスしたわ。これ果たして本当にミスだったっけ。そんな悪くないんじゃなかったっけこれ。そんなだけど形勢は悪いことには変わりなさそうだな。そんな悪くない気はするけどな、悪い中でも。ですよね。うざいな。それは若干握手臭いな。そんなことない。交換すると仮にビショップ出てきたらクイーン回ってけどビショップ出てきたらクイーンナイトでブロックされてるか忘れてたわ。障害だったわ。なんかそんな悪くなさそうだな、思ってるより。 よりないのかな。つくしかないよな、この。しかないはちょっと若干言い過ぎだけど。取ったらビショップで解いて。取ったら取って、回して、で、入れて。あ、けど、先に取れるか。消さられるか。なんかこういうそれぞれ引いとくか。で、クイーン出てこれを狙うみたいな。やるんだろうな。やると思ったさ。引くよりないかな。つくのも一旦つくのも考えたけど普通に取られるかな。あー、うざ。時間切れたわ。変化普通に。これなんか認めたくないんだけど、これのこんななんか消極的な手を。ちなみになんかどうしたら今回は取るのが正解なの？あ、これがつけるからってことか。ナイトに行き場所ないからってことか。ちなみにこういうことすると、これはマジでうざそうだけど、なんか一応なんか手として成立したのがうざいんだよな、こういうのが。ナイトとカスト、あー、うぜえやつだ。こうされてもこうしてナイトどいた時にポンつくのが正解ってやつだ。あ、もううざこれ。ほんとやりたくないんだけど、しかもよく野良で当たるイキリッチは絶対やってくるからな。うぜえな。これも一応名前がついてるな。基本的に何されてもここついていけばいいのか。頭使わずにそこついていけばいいのか。どの変化でもここつくもんな。これとかはこれもこれつけばいいのか。これは普通に終わってるか。 それはちょっと変じゃないか。とがめたいなそれ。あのナイトを追っ払うだけでとどめられるんじゃない？どっちがいいかな。形はこっちじゃない。取ったらこの辺つけばいいし。それ明快に変なら相手やってることおかしい。もうこのポーン気にしないためになんかもうこれいくか。それかなんかついて取ってもあるかもしれないけど、なんかオープンファイルなんか敵に与える方がこのポーンへのダメージが大きそうだから、もうガン無視してすべてを突き去っていくか。クイーン若干気になるけどな。ついてつけばいいか。ひょっとしてゲームが終わってね、これ試合終了じゃないですか、これ。そんなことないですか。跳ねてつくとけど相手は別の場所に行かれてそのラインが若干うざいか。うぜえな。もうぶっころ。Bishop to D2 takes queen to D7。 知らんけどブリッツ出し試してみるか。こっちの方がいいよ。ビショップにつけられてうざい。もう一枚。あとは野取られ山取られ代官山メディカル。意味不明になっちゃった。ほっとく？相手はどうしよう。 来んの？できたら来んの？やっといて。つけてきたらルック交換しといていいんじゃない？で、ここのポンを落として、もう全部落としていくよ。そして取られてめんどくさくしたこれ。もうめんどくさくしてそうだ。で、金入ってなって取って金が上がると、うざこれ。金入ってやってやっといて入って見て、パペチュアルチェックっぽいね。それはごっつぁんゴールじゃね？一旦入っといて。これポンついてくるのもう受からんでしょ。やっといて、この辺を行ったり来たりしながらポンついていけば、ビショップ出てきて、むずいなこれ。こっちもついていけばいいか。ここも受からんだろこれ。でブロックしといて、これもまそうで、もう受からんやろこれ。どう？投了かよ。さあ、国いくつ出そうかな。こういうことやってると炎上する。よかった。多分対戦相手、日本語わかんなくて。こんなひどいこと言ってると炎上する。人の心がない。That plays hyperarts dragon. E3 queen b6 was okay for a white. 知らんけど。That's quite odd move. なんか見た目おかしいよな。これは朝鮮民主主義人民共和国ですか。 にゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃにゃこれ死ぬ？我々これ死ぬ？死なねえよな。これで死んでたら歴史上もう雲仙の屍だわ。ナイト C4? Maybe? だから一旦キャスって一旦ドロップバックスビショップ playing F4 and E5, so he will probably plays maybe D6, so F4 knight to C6, F5 takes でワンポンゾーンするからちょっと若干うざくて他のアイディアはビショップこの大学なので使おうとしてるからクイーン出といてなんか取るだけだ。出たところでなんかルック使われてうぜえからそれもそれでうぜえねん。じゃあ消極的にこれをプリベントしとくか。ナイト B5 ナイト B5 ナイト B4 だけど達成できれば強いけどクイーンつけに行っていいんじゃないこれ。けどダメか、このナイトがいるから。じゃあちょっとお帰りお引き取りいただいてちょっとお引き取り願います。そうこうしてるうちに時間がなくなっちゃったよね。ゆっくりしすぎてるな。それはね、何かがおかしいの。何かがおかしいと見た。それクイーンただじゃね。取っとく。ビショップの間入らせてなんか一旦ついてただやん。危ね。やべえ、駒がちょっとだんだん駒ただしていくんだよ。もうイラつく。もう超なえぽよなんですけど。 に手ついてどう？うぜえなそれ。なんで相手そんな時間あんの？うざ。いやこれドローか負けかじゃんこれ。そんなことないよ。もういいわこれ。最後にチャレンジしていいですか？おっと？おっと？はい、残念勝。どこが悪いんだろうな。これやるとこれで間跳ねといていいのか。ここでこれやってもライトいけばいいのか。今度は取れば取ってやって出てけば問題なしと。こういうことやるとビショップでブロックして終わるんだよ。こういうことやるとそんなことないよな。できないよ。クイーン A5 はおかしいんだよなこれ明らかに。あ、やっぱ最善それなんだ。よかったわ。考えた末になんか最善に行きつけて。F4 が若干おかしかった。F4 の後の多分ライト E5 でそうだよね。若干変だなって思ったもん。我ながら指してて。跳ねられてなんかビショップ出てこういうプランがうざかった。ごめん、なんか語彙力うざいしかね。そうだよね。これゲームが終わってるよね。ビショップ逃げたらこれ取れるし。ところがここから最悪の日々が始まるんだよね。 最悪じゃん。勝ちのプランが見つかんなくてさ、構造的にあのロックのなんかうまい具合にむしり取った時にあのねポーンが落ちればね、ワンチャンあるかなと思って。そう、これこれしか勝ち筋がなかった。なんかまた唯一の勝ち筋を拾ってしまったな。Twitch で他の配信者見てみて。いいよ、なんかこんなバロラントがどうのこうのとか知らなかった。そういう
But he didn't fall for it. He didn't fall for it though.
いいな、128円も見ていいな。ストラップラビット。こいつは WF の女の人。
So let's say white does nothing. This is actually the... No, it's not. Because this is not a threat. But it actually, if f3 does want to play here, because now it's a threat. Maybe. Like this. Okay. But it slowly started slipping here, like... Very high percentile. Yeah, so g5 I was a little bit unsure about. So I preferred rook a6 or h5.
h5?
Yeah, I can also. And now my opponent kind of gave me what I wanted. b5 immediately even. Do you remember I gave a line with... I said if rook f1 here, I want to play b5. Apparently this is... Oh, that's why. Okay, b5, the idea was good, but there was a tactical reason for why white was okay. Because if white didn't have this rook f5,
engine move. わからんもん。あ、いいわ。6C4 どうしよう。どうしましょう。おじさんどうしましょう。普通にミムズをやればいいか。D5, CTXD, Queen TXD, D5 is なんかそういうラインも存在したはずだよね。そういうラインも存在した記憶がある。Maybe I can recapture this pawn with my queen. で、取って、取るとか。でしょ。D5 looks good. 取るとうざいな。今日なんか理にかなってはいそうじゃないか。どう？クイーンの位置も中央に近いし穴ぼこあるし ビショップ使いたいけど、こう使うとなんかこっち出られてない。超一旦なんだよな。だったらあのビショップの出る場所、ここに出た瞬間はめられるようにして、こっちの方がなんか理にかなってるから。ここ出た瞬間こっち跳ねるか。疲れたくないもんな。疲れたくないもんな。疲れたら不愉快だね。防いどいて、肺にポンついたら一旦ブロックしといて。このビショップほんとゴミくずになっちゃったな。取ったらちょっと取ってこのラインで攻めればいいか。これがなんかめちゃめちゃ弱く見える。それはね、許されない。取りといて。ついてみるか。どうだろうね。今の若干変だった。先に向こうのビショップ取ってればよかったな。これなんかこうコンペンセーションありそうだね。若干うざ。あ、もう超ナイポヨなんですけども、キャストかブリッツだし、あ、やばい、局面やばくしてるこれ。一旦どっかで受けたいけど、なんか間入られてブロックされるのちょっとうざいな。あー、うざっ。し普通にこれで負けてたか。普通に勝ったりだったな。あー、さっきこっち取ればよかったのか。なるほどね。気づかなかったわ。けどどの順番で勝ってもどの道勝ってるよな。これでもどの道勝ってはいるよな。けど取れるもんなら取ればよかったな。普通にこれで一勝だったな。そうだね、これでリキャプチャーすればよかったね。うざいことにしてしまったんだな、これね。しょうもないな。そろそろタクティクスちょっとやって配信終わりにするか。しょうもない巻き方が多いな。いつも基本時間足りないし、もうちょっと早指し、もうちょっと体に染み込ませてノータイムでさせるようにした方がいいだろうけど。これクイーン出てゲーム終わってね。これ普通に 向こう取っちゃダメなのこれ。はそんなのクリティクス問題にするね。これでも持ってねこれ。向こう取れば持ってねこれ。あ、適当にやるからもうまた。いやもうこんなの勝ちやんのにやっても。こんなの低評価低評価。あ、これ取ってもらってるやつね。取り捨てられる。若干嫌だ。つくと取り引いて普通に取りでクイーンを引いてクイーン入ればいいのか。じゃあこれだね。はブザじゃあこれまあもうこの辺りのコンセプトも似たようなもんだからいいじゃん。もう何でもダメなのシナムとこれだとダメなの。ああこういうのがあるのか。これ回収されるぐらいでも負けてるな多分。適当にやりすぎだよな。1切れやって何が楽しいんだよこいつはってすげえ。キチゲーじゃねえんだよマジで1切れ苦手なんだよ。将棋もそうだけどなんか自分より苦手な人も多いみたいで知らんけど。これ割となんか楽しそうな演技なでなんか間跳ねてポンついて書いてたりするの。なんか黒刺して思ってそうだよな。ああドローこれ行ったり来たりしてドローもしかしてくっそくだらねえかマジでくだらねえ。配信者はユナイテッド・ステイツ知らんけど多分ロシアよくわかんない感じでモンスター知らんやつ from the US わからん。あれかスペインのやつ知らんやつ。あ、なんか俺もいたわ自分。ライブ配信中いたわ。なんか配信者ページいじれないんですよ。日本語だからやばい発言してもあんまバレないんでそれだけが取り俺もなんか動画作ろう。もういいや、日本人はもう捨てた。使えなさすぎる。みんな2級とかなんかよくわかんない人の配信見てもう使えん日本人。特にマジで YouTuber 界隈で超使えん。いらん。言いませんもん。 ジャップでも使えない。日常的にすべしにこくだ。Bishop to g5, a6, knight a3, b5, knight d5, bishop d7, takes. は？それちょっといい申し立てしていいですか？Is it possible for me to play knight d7? Pawn take d6 で次のムーブで F5 プレイすればいいから、ほっとくとこのポン落ちるからなんも普通にこれ取っちゃダメなの？ダメ？やってるこれ？我々やったこれ？ナイトなんか辺境にいるし、なんか千葉県の稲毛海岸みたいな辺境にいるし、千葉県民に失礼か。ごめんねなんか。取られて取ってビショップ取ってビショップにつけてクイーン取ったら向こう取ってだけどビショップ取られて取って金で取って取られても取ってもコマゾンか。これやったくさくね。我々やったくさいね。勝手に我々ってみんなを巻き込んでしまったけど。めっちゃ強いセンターあるしいいんじゃないの？ダメなの？これさせないの？こ普通にさせそうな気がしたんだけど、我々の気のせいこれ。これ黒持ってプレイヤブルだと思ったんだけど、クイーンアクティベートしよう。一応チェック入れとくか。これ相手やってない？これ我々もう我々もらったんじゃないか。そんなことない。冷静に一旦受けといてさ。フィンがマネーバーしたら E5 からナイト回収して勝ちだし、相手もこれ何もできなくねまた。何もしなかったらQueen takes E7 寄って引いた後にその心はちょっと分かりません。ちょっとゆっくりさせてください。相手の動きの心が分からない。意味ないんじゃないかな。その引いてもうめんどくさくしたか。国引かれてめんどくさいなこれまた。なんでこの局面をややこしくするかね。一緒だったのにまたもう。もううざいな、クイーンぶつけられても。普通にそうだ、普通にまただな。普通に決勝じゃなかった今。時間がないよ全くもう。もう 5.3 とかできるじゃん。普通にいや時間なかったからこういうことやったけど、普通に相手何もできないか。ほらクイーンぶつかれてなんか強勝ち 1.5 とか、若干疲れたからもう終わりにするか。ほんとクソゲー投了してくれよ。そもそもそうだよ、普通に全然させる局面だよこれ。普通に必勝だよ。